I didn't choose him, I just needed someone, anyone. The rain came down in sheets, turning the streetlights into blurry halos as I pushed through the crowded sidewalk, my breath coming in sharp, uneven pulls behind me. I could still hear his voice, Ryan, always too loud, always too close. Emily, wait. I didn't turn, I couldn't. My heels slipped slightly against the wet pavement as I cut between two strangers, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing in my ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. Tonight I had planned everything, parked 3 blocks away, left early, kept my head down. But he found me, he always found me. And then I saw him standing still in the chaos, like the storm didn't touch him, tall, broad shoulders, dressed in black, like he belonged to a different world entirely. I didn't think, I didn't hesitate. I just reached out and grabbed his hand. His skin was warm, steady, solid in a way nothing else felt in that moment. Please, I whispered, not even sure if the word made it past my lips. And for a second, everything stopped, the noise, the rain, even my fear, because he didn't pull away. Most people would have jerked back, confused, maybe annoyed, but not him. His fingers tightened slightly around mine, not possessive, not gentle, just certain, like he had already decided something I didn't understand yet. Emily. Ryan's voice cut through the air again, closer, now too close. I flinched instinctively, but the man in front of me didn't move. I looked up finally, and that's when it hit me, his eyes. Dark, calm, watching me like he could see every piece of panic I was trying to hide. Stay still, he said, his voice low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. I froze, not because I trusted him, but because something in me knew I should. Ryan stepped into view a few feet away, his expression shifting from anger to confusion as he took in the scene. My hand in someone else's, his jaw tightened. What is this? He demanded, taking a step forward, but the man beside me didn't react, not at first. He just looked at Ryan with a quiet focus that made the air feel heavier, like something unseen had shifted around us. Then slowly, deliberately, he moved closer to me, closing the space until I could feel the warmth of his presence, shielding me from the rain, from Ryan, from everything. Is there a problem? He asked, calm, simple, but something about the way he said it made Ryan hesitate just for a second. And that second was enough. I noticed things, then small details I hadn't seen before. A black car idling at the curb, headlights cutting through the rain, figures inside, barely visible, men who weren't looking at anything, but somehow saw everything. Ryan's confidence flickered. He glanced past us toward the street, then back at the man holding my hand like he was trying to understand something that didn't make sense. She's with me, Ryan said finally, but it sounded weaker now, uncertain. The man beside me didn't even blink. Not anymore, he replied, and it wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening, but it landed with a weight that made my breath catch. Ryan stepped back just a fraction, and I felt it, the shift, the invisible line being drawn, and suddenly I realized something that made my pulse stutter. I hadn't just grabbed a stranger, I had stepped into something else entirely, and as his grip on my hand remained steady, unyielding, I understood one terrifying, undeniable truth. He wasn't letting go. Ryan looked at me again like he was trying to decide if I was worth the trouble. But something in his expression had changed, the sharp edge of control slipping into something uncertain. Emily, this is not funny, he said, but he did not step closer. Not this time, not with that man standing between us. I felt the hand holding mine shift slightly, not tighter, not looser, just a quiet reminder that he was still there. You should leave, the man said, and it was not a suggestion, it was not even a warning, it was a fact stated as simply as the rain falling around us. Ryan let out a short laugh, but it did not sound real. It sounded forced, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. You do not know who you are talking to, he said, but his voice lacked conviction, and for the first time since I had known him, he did not sound in control. The man beside me tilted his head, just slightly, studying him with an expression that was almost bored. I know exactly who I am talking to, he replied, and something in those words settled heavy in the air. Ryan opened his mouth like he was going to argue again. But then one of the car doors behind us opened with a soft, precise sound, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to draw attention. I glanced over my shoulder and saw one of the men step out, tall, composed, dressed in a dark suit that looked untouched by the rain. He did not rush, he did not speak, he simply stood there waiting. And that was enough. Ryan saw him too. I felt it in the way his posture shifted, the way his shoulders stiffened, like his instincts were catching up to something his mind had not yet accepted. This is not over, Ryan said finally, but the words sounded smaller now, like they were missing something important. He took a step back, then another, his eyes flicking between me and the man holding my hand, as if trying to memorize the moment before turning away completely. He disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by the same storm that had brought me here, and just like that he was gone. I did not realize I was holding my breath until it left me all at once shaky, uneven. I should have felt relief, I should have felt safe. But instead I felt something else, something heavier, something that settled deep in my chest. Because the man beside me still had not let go. Slowly, I turned back to him, the city noise rushing back and around us, the rain still falling like nothing had changed, but everything had. Thank you, I said, my voice barely steady. And for a moment, he just looked at me like he was weighing the words, deciding what they meant. Then his gaze dropped briefly to our hands still joined before returning to my face. You needed help, he said simply, like that explained everything, like that was the only reason that mattered. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close he was, how easily he had stepped into my life without asking. I can take it from here, I added softly, a small attempt to reclaim something of my own space, my own control. But his expression did not change. If anything, it became more focused, more certain. No, he said, and the word landed quiet, but absolute. I blinked, caught off guard. No, I repeated, unsure if I had heard him correctly. His grip finally shifted, not releasing, but guiding, as he turned slightly toward the black car at the curb. You cannot, he said, and this time there was something underneath his calm, something I could not quite name, but could definitely feel. Because he will come back. My stomach tightened at the certainty in his voice, the way he said it, like it was not a possibility, but a guarantee. And next time, he continued, his eyes holding mine steady, unyielding. You will not be standing next to me unless you choose to stay. The rain seemed louder than heavier, pressing in around us as the weight of his words settled into place. And for the first time that night, I understood this was not over, it was just beginning. I should have let go. I knew that the moment he said it, the moment his words settled into my chest like something final, but my hand did not move, and neither did his. The rain soaked through my coat, my hair clinging to my face as I stood there, caught between instinct and something I could not explain. I do not even know your name, I said quietly, the words feeling small compared to everything else happening around us. His gaze held mine steady, unreadable for a second that stretched longer than it should have. Then finally, he spoke. Adrian. Just that, no last name, no explanation, like it was enough, like it should be enough, and somehow it was not, but I did not push. I was too aware of everything else, the car waiting, the man standing by the door, the way the street around us seemed to bend slightly around his presence, like people noticed, but chose not to see. Emily, I said after a moment, because it felt wrong not to give him something in return, even if I did not understand why. His eyes softened just a fraction at the sound of my name, not warmth, not kindness, just recognition, like he had filed it away somewhere important. Emily, he repeated, and hearing it from him felt different, heavier, like it meant more than it should have. I pulled in a breath, trying to steady myself, trying to think clearly again. I cannot just get into a car with you, I said, the words coming out more controlled than I felt. I do not know where you are taking me. I do not know anything about you. Adrian did not argue. He did not rush me. He simply watched me like he was waiting for me to reach the conclusion on my own. You know enough, he said quietly, and I almost laughed at that, because no, I did not. I knew nothing except that my ex-husband had just walked away from him without a fight, and that alone should have told me something important, something dangerous. People do not just walk away from Ryan, I said, my voice lower, now more honest. Not unless they have a reason. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like I had just said the one thing that mattered. Exactly, he replied, and that single word settled deeper than anything else. The man by the car stepped closer, then not aggressively, not impatient, just present, opening the back door with a smooth, practiced motion, revealing a dark interior that felt both inviting and intimidating at the same time. I hesitated, my feet rooted to the wet pavement, my mind racing through every possible outcome, none of them clear, none of them safe. But then I looked back down the street where Ryan had disappeared, and a cold realization settled in. He would come back. Adrian had not said it as a guess. He had said it like fact, like certainty, and suddenly standing here alone felt far more dangerous than stepping into the unknown. If I get in that car, I said, slowly meeting Adrian's gaze again. What happens next? He stepped closer, then not invading, not forcing, just enough that I could hear him clearly over the rain. Next, he said, his voice low, steady. You stop running. My breath caught slightly at that, not because of what he said, but because of how certain he sounded. Like running had never been an option for me. Not really. I glanced at the car again, at the man holding the door open, at Adrian standing beside me, waiting, not pushing, just waiting for me to decide. And for the first time that night, I realized something else. I still had a choice, maybe not a safe one, maybe not a smart one, but a choice nonetheless. Slowly, I shifted my hand and is not pulling away, but not clinging either, just enough to feel the weight of it one last time before I made the decision. And then without another word, I stepped forward toward the car, because something deep inside me knew this was not where the story ended. It was where it truly began. The door closed behind me, with a quiet, solid sound that felt louder than anything else that night. And, just like that, the rain disappeared, replaced by a stillness that pressed in from all sides. I sat frozen for a second, staring at my own reflection in the dark, tinted window, my hair damp, my breathing uneven, my hand still tingling from where it had been wrapped in as Adrian slid into the seat across from me, not rushed, not hesitant, just controlled, like every movement had already been decided long before I stepped into his world. The man outside closed the door gently, then moved to the front seat, and within seconds the car began to move smooth, effortless, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. The city lights blurred past us, streaks of gold and white against the glass, but inside it was quiet, too quiet. I became aware of every small detail: the soft hum of the engine, the faint scent of leather, the way Adrian sat back, slightly, one arm resting near the door, his posture relaxed, but not careless, never careless. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to ground myself, trying to slow the racing thoughts in my head. This was real, this was happening. Where are we going? I asked, finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Adrian's eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment he did not answer, like he was deciding how much I needed to know. "Somewhere you can breathe," he said, and something about the way he said it made my chest tighten, because I had not realized until then how hard it had been to breathe. Before I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You say that like you know me," I said quietly. His gaze did not waver. "I know enough," he replied, again that same phrase, but this time it felt different, less like assumption, more like observation. I shifted slightly in my seat, the weight of his attention impossible to ignore. "Then tell me something I do not know," I said, a small challenge slipping into my tone, because I needed something, anything, to feel like I still had control. Adrian leaned forward, just slightly, not invading, just closing the distance enough that his voice did not need to carry. "Your ex-husband did not follow you tonight by accident," he said, and the words hit harder than I expected. My stomach dropped a fraction, my fingers tightening together in my lap. "He has been watching you," Adrian continued calmly, like he was stating the weather, like it was nothing new, waiting for the right moment. I shook my head instinctively, a reflex more than a thought. "That is not possible," I said, but even as I said it, doubt crept in, small, sharp, and undeniable. Adrian watched me closely, not with sympathy and not with judgment, just with a quiet certainty that made it impossible to look away. "You already know it is," he said softly, and I hated how right that sounded, how easily it fit into the pieces I had been trying to ignore. The missed calls, the way Ryan always seemed to appear at the wrong time, the way he knew things I had not told him. My throat felt tight. Suddenly the space inside the car smaller than before. "Why do you care?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, something deeper, something harder to read. "Because you stepped into my world," he said simply, "and now you are part of it." The words settled between us, heavy, final, and I felt it again, that strange pull between fear and something else, something I could not name. The car slowed slightly as we turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the city fading into the background, replaced by something calmer, something more controlled. I looked out the window, then back at him, my pulse still unsteady, my thoughts still tangled, but one thing was clear: I had not escaped anything. I had just crossed a line I could not see, and as Adrian's gaze held mine steady, unwavering, I realized something that sent a quiet chill down my spine. This was not about where he was taking me. It was about the fact that I had already gone too far to turn back. The car slowed to a smooth stop, and for a moment neither of us moved. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in the air, the way the quiet outside felt different, heavier, controlled. The door beside me opened, and the man in the front seat stepped out first. The rain had softened now, just a light drizzle tapping against the roof, as Adrian reached for the handle across from me and pushed his door open without looking away from me. "We are here," he said simply, like that explained everything. I hesitated just a second longer, then stepped out onto the pavement. The ground was dry here, shielded by a wide overhang that stretched across the front of the building. I looked up slowly, taking it in. Tall glass windows, soft golden light spilling out onto the entrance, everything clean, sharp, expensive. but not loud, not flashy. It did not need to be the kind of place that did not ask for attention, because it already owned it. What is this place? I asked, my voice quieter, now almost cautious. Adrian stepped beside me, his presence close enough to feel, without touching, safe. He answered, and again that word landed deeper than it should have. I let out a breath. I did not realize I had been holding my shoulders, dropping slightly. As I took a step forward toward the entrance, the doors opened before we even reached them. A man inside, nodding once at Adrian, not surprised, not questioning, just ready, like he had been expecting us. The lobby was quiet. Warm, polished marble under my feet, the faint scent of something clean, something expensive lingering in the air. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how cold I felt now that the rush of everything was fading. Adrian noticed. I saw it in the way his gaze flickered briefly over me before he slipped off his coat and held it out. I paused, unsure for a second, then took it slowly, the fabric heavy, warm, as I pulled it around my shoulders. Thank you, I said again, softer this time, more real. He nodded once, like it was nothing like it was expected, and somehow that made it feel even more significant. We moved through the space together, not rushed, not slow, just steady. His steps measured mine, uncertain, but following. The elevator doors opened without a word from him, the man at the desk already pressing a button. As we approached, I stepped inside the small space, the quiet closing in again. As the doors slid shut behind us, I watched the numbers climb, trying to steady my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything, but nothing felt simple anymore. You bring everyone here? I asked after a moment, not looking at him. Adrian's reflection in the mirrored wall met my eyes instead. No, he said, and there was no hesitation in that answer, none at all. I turned slightly to face him, then studying him more carefully, now the sharp lines of his face, the calm control in his posture, the way nothing about him seemed accidental. Then why me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because I needed to understand something, anything. Adrian's gaze held mine in the reflection, not cold, not warm, just certain. Because you asked for help, he said quietly, and something about the way he said it made my chest tighten again, not because of the words themselves, but because of the weight behind them, like he had taken that moment seriously in a way I had not expected. The elevator slowed, then stopped, the doors opening onto a quiet hallway, soft lighting, muted colors, everything designed to feel calm, controlled. Adrian stepped out first, then glanced back at me, not commanding, not demanding, just waiting. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed him, because at some point, without realizing it, I had already started trusting that he would not let anything happen to me. And that realization was more unsettling than anything else. We walked down the hall, stopping in front of a door. Adrian reached for the handle, then paused, just briefly, his hand still on the metal, as he looked back at me. Once you walk in, he said, his voice low, steady, things change. My breath caught slightly, my fingers tightening around the edges of his coat. As I met his gaze, they already have, I replied before I could stop myself. And something in his expression shifted, just enough to notice, just enough to matter. Then, without another word, he opened the door and stepped inside, leaving me standing at the threshold, knowing that whatever waited beyond it would not let me go back to who I was before. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, staring into the space beyond the doorway, like it might tell me something, like it might warn me. But it did not. It just waited, quiet, still, certain. I stepped inside. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, something shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle awareness settling over me, like I had entered a place where everything had already been decided. The room was larger than I expected, warm light stretching across dark wood floors, clean lines, minimal furniture, everything intentional, nothing out of place. It did not feel like a home, it felt like control. Adrian moved past me, without hesitation, setting his keys on a low table near the wall, his movements smooth, familiar, like he had done this 1,000 times before. I turned slowly, taking everything and trying to ground myself in something real, something I could understand, but nothing here felt ordinary. You can sit, he said, and I realized I had been standing near the door, still wrapped in his coat, like I had forgotten how to move. I nodded slightly, then stepped further inside, lowering myself onto the edge of the couch, the leather cool against my skin, my hands resting in my lap. Again, the same position I had held in the car, like it was the only thing keeping me steady. Adrian disappeared briefly into another room, then returned with a glass of water, setting it down in front of me. Without a word, I hesitated for a second before picking it up, my fingers brushing the surface, the cold grounding me. As I took a small sip, my throat finally loosening. Thank you, I said again, and this time it felt different, less automatic, more intentional. He gave a small nod, then sat across from me, not too close, not too far, just enough to keep space between us, while still holding my attention. "You are safe here," he said, and I exhaled slowly because I wanted to believe that I really did, but something inside me was still on edge, still waiting for something to go wrong. "Safe from him?" I asked quietly. Adrian's gaze did not shift. "Safe from anyone who thinks they can take something that is not theirs," he replied, and the words made something in my chest tighten again, not fear exactly, but something close, something unfamiliar. I looked down at the glass in my hands, then back up at him. "You talk like you know exactly what is going to happen next," I said. Adrian leaned back slightly, his expression calm, unchanged. "I do," he answered simply, and there was no arrogance in it, no hesitation, just certainty, the kind that did not leave room for doubt. "Then tell me," I said, my voice softer now, but more direct. "What happens next?" The room felt quieter somehow, like even the air was waiting. Adrian studied me for a moment, his eyes moving over my face, not invasive, not judging, just observing, like he was reading something beneath the surface, something I had not said out loud. "That depends on you," he said finally. I frowned slightly, the answer not what I expected. "On me?" I repeated. He nodded once. "You can stay here tonight and rest, or you can walk out that door and pretend none of this happened," he said, his tone even controlled. "But if you leave," he added, his gaze sharpening just slightly, "you will not be the same person who walked away from him earlier." I swallowed hard, the truth in that statement impossible to ignore, because he was right. Something had already changed. I could feel it in the way my thoughts moved, in the way my instincts no longer felt the same. "And if I stay?" I asked. Adrian leaned forward, just enough that his presence filled the space between us. Not overwhelming, not forced, just there. "Then you stop being the person who runs," he said quietly. And those words hit deeper than anything else, because they were not about Ryan, not about danger. They were about me, about something I had been avoiding long before tonight. I looked away for a second, my grip tightening around the glass. Then slowly, I set it down, my hands finally, still, my breath steadying, as I lifted my eyes back to his. "I am tired of running," I admitted, the words coming out softer than I expected, but more honest than anything I had said all night. Adrian held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once, like he had been waiting for that answer all along. And in that quiet exchange, something settled, something final, something that told me I had just made a decision that would change everything. The silence after my words did not feel empty, it felt full, like something had just locked into place. Adrian watched me for a moment longer, then stood, without urgency, like he already knew what came next. "Good," he said simply, and turned toward the hallway, his confidence steady, unshaken, like my decision had confirmed something he had already expected. "Come with me," he added, and I hesitated for only a second before standing, the coat still wrapped around me like a shield. I followed him down the hallway, my footsteps quieter than is the soft lighting casting long shadows along the walls, everything about this place designed to feel controlled, predictable, safe. We stopped in front of another door, and he opened it without knocking, stepping aside slightly so I could enter first. I moved past him slowly, taking in the room, a bedroom, simple but elegant. A large bed, clean lines, a soft lamp glowing in the corner, a window stretching across one wall showing the city lights far below. It felt different from the rest of the apartment, less like control, more like calm. "You can stay here," Adrian said from behind me. I turned to face him, my fingers tightening slightly around the edge of his coat again. "And you?" I asked before I could stop myself. He paused just briefly, then shook his head. "I have work," he replied, like it was obvious, like it was constant. Something that never stopped. I nodded slowly, unsure why that answer made something in my chest feel heavier. "You do not have to worry about anything tonight," he continued, stepping back toward the door. "No one will come here without my permission." The certainty in his voice settled over me like a promise I did not ask for, but still accepted. "Emily," he said, and I looked up, meeting his gaze again. "Get some rest." I nodded once, and for a second neither of us moved, the space between us quiet, steady. Then he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him, the sound final, but not isolating, just distant. I stood there alone in the room, the quiet pressing in again, but this time it felt different, less suffocating, more still. I moved slowly toward the window, my reflection faint against the glass as I looked out at the city, the streets below, glowing with movement, with life, everything continuing like nothing had changed. But I knew better, everything had changed. I slipped off his coat, carefully placing it over the back of a chair, my fingers lingering on the fabric for just a moment before pulling away, like letting go of something I was not ready to lose. Yet I sat on the edge of the bed, then leaned back slowly, my body Finally starting to feel the weight of the night, the exhaustion catching up to me, my mind still racing, but softer, now slower, my eyes drifting closed for just a second, when a faint sound pulled me back, footsteps outside the room, not loud, not rushed, just present. I sat up slightly, my attention sharpening, but the sound passed quickly, fading down the hallway, replaced by silence again. I let out a breath, relaxing back into the pillows, telling myself it was nothing, that I was safe here, that Adrian had said so, and for some reason, I believed him more than I should have. My hand moved, instinctively brushing against the empty space beside me like I was checking for something that was not there. I frowned slightly at the thought, then shook it off, closing my eyes again. But just as I began to drift, a new realization settled quietly into my mind, something that refused to be ignored. I had stepped into his world, I had chosen to stay, and now, whether I understood it or not, I was no longer just running from my past. I was moving towards something else, something unknown, something that felt just as dangerous as it did inevitable. And as sleep finally began to pull me under, one thought lingered, clear and steady. He had not just given me a place to stay, he had given me a reason to stop leaving. I woke before the light fully reached the room, not because of noise, but because of something else, something unfamiliar. My body felt rested, but my mind was already awake, already aware. I lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember where I was. And then it came back all at once, the rain, the street, his hand, the car, Adrian. I sat up slowly, the soft sheets falling around me, the quiet in the room, almost too perfect, too controlled, like even the morning had been arranged. I swung my feet over the side of the bed, the floor cool beneath them, grounding me. As I stood, the city stretched out beyond the window, pale light beginning to rise over the skyline, everything distant, everything far away from where I had been just hours ago. I moved closer to the glass, my reflection clearer. Now my hair dry, my face calmer, but my eyes different, sharper, more aware, like something inside me had shifted overnight. I wrapped my arms loosely around myself, exhaling slowly, trying to steady the thoughts that were already starting to move too fast. What now? The question came, without permission, without answer. I turned away from the window and reached for the coat draped over the chair, my fingers brushing the fabric again, familiar now, like it belonged in this space, like I belonged here, which made no sense at all. I slipped it on without thinking, the weight settling over my shoulders, warmer than it should have been, and that was when I heard it, a quiet knock, not loud, not urgent, just precise. I froze for a second, my attention snapping toward the door. Yes, I called out, my voice steady despite the sudden tension. The handle turned slowly, and the door opened just enough for a woman to step inside. She was older, maybe in her late 40s, composed, dressed in simple but elegant clothing, her expression calm but observant, like she missed nothing. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said, her voice smooth, professional. I blinked, slightly caught off guard. "Good morning," I replied, unsure how she knew my name, though part of me already suspected. She inclined her head slightly. "Mr. Volkov asked me to make sure you had everything you need," she continued. And there it was, his last name, Volkov. It settled into my mind, heavier than I expected, like it carried weight I did not fully understand yet. "I am fine," I said after a moment. She smiled faintly, like she expected that answer. "There is breakfast prepared if you would like it," she added, then paused, just briefly, her eyes flicking to the coat around my shoulders, and something almost knowing passed through her expression before it was gone. "Mr. Volkov is in the study," she finished, and with that she stepped back toward the door, giving me space, giving me a choice. I hesitated just a second, then nodded. "Thank you," I said quietly. She inclined her head once more, then left, the door closing softly behind her. I stood there for a moment longer, the silence returning, but it felt different now, less empty, more expectant, like the day was already moving forward, whether I was ready or not. I looked down at the coat around me, then toward the door, my pulse steady but heavier than before, because now there was a name, a place, a direction, and I knew if I walked out of this room, I would not just be a guest anymore. I would be stepping deeper into something I still did not fully understand, but could no longer pretend I was not part of. I took a breath, then moved toward the door, my hand resting on the handle for a brief second before I opened it, because whatever waited on the other side was no longer something I could avoid. It was something I had already chosen. I stepped into the hallway, and the quiet followed me, but it felt different now, less like emptiness, more like control, like every sound had a place, and every movement was expected. My steps slowed as I moved forward, the soft carpet muting everything, making it almost too easy to forget where I was if not for the subtle details, the cameras tucked into corners, the way doors were closed, not just for privacy, but for intention I reached the end of the hallway and saw it a partially open door at the far side, lights spilling out in a clean, steady line. I knew without asking that it was. As I paused for a second, my hand brushing lightly against the edge of his coat, like it might anchor me, before I pushed the door open just enough to step inside. Adrian stood near the window, his back to me, one hand resting in his pocket, the other holding a phone at his side, like the conversation had just ended or never needed to begin. He did not turn immediately, but I knew he had already registered my presence. The air shifted slightly, acknowledging me before he did. "You are awake," he said. Finally, his voice calm, even without facing me. I stepped further into the room, my eyes moving over the space. Large desk, minimal clutter, screens along one wall, displaying information I could not fully read, everything precise, everything in order. "I am," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. He turned, then his gaze settling on me instantly, taking in everything, the coat, the hesitation, the space I still kept between us. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly, like he was measuring something unseen. "Did you sleep?" he asked. I nodded once. "Yes." A pause followed, not uncomfortable, but not casual either, just filled with things neither of us said. "Good," he said, and moved toward the desk, setting his phone down before leaning back slightly against the edge, his attention fully on me now. "Breakfast is ready," he added, and I almost smiled at the normality of it, the contrast too sharp against everything else. "I am not really hungry," I admitted. He studied me for a second longer, then nodded once, accepting the answer without pushing, like he had already expected it. "Then sit," he said, gesturing lightly toward a chair across from him. I hesitated, then moved forward, sitting carefully, my hands folding again in my lap, the same position, the same quiet habit, like I was trying to hold something together inside me. Adrian watched that too. I could tell nothing about him missed anything. "You are thinking too much," he said simply, and I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but softer. "That is because I do not understand anything," I replied honestly, his head tilted slightly, like he was considering that. "You understand more than you think," he said, and I shook my head just slightly. "I know my ex-husband is suddenly not a problem when he has been my entire problem for months. I know I walked into a stranger's life and somehow ended up here, and I know you talk like everything is already decided before I even asked the question." I stopped there, my voice steady but my chest tight. "That is not understanding, that is guessing." Adrian listened without interruption, his gaze steady, not defensive, not dismissive, just present. When I finished, he pushed off the desk and stepped closer, not enough to invade, just enough to shift the space between us again. "Then let me make it simple," he said, his voice lower, now more direct. "Your ex-husband is not a problem because I decided he would not be." The words were calm, but they carried something undeniable, something final. I felt it in the way my breath caught, slightly in the way my thoughts stalled for a second. "You decided," I repeated quietly. Adrian held my gaze without hesitation. "Yes," he said, and there was no doubt in it, none at all. I swallowed slowly, the weight of that answer settling into place, because it was not just confidence, it was control, the kind I had never seen before in me. I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out softer than I expected. His eyes did not move from mine. "You decided that yourself," he replied, and something about that hit differently, something deeper. Because he was right, I had made that choice the moment I reached for his hand, the moment I stepped into his car, the moment I stayed, and now sitting here in front of him, I realized something that made my pulse shift just slightly. This was no longer about being saved, this was about what came after, and whether I was ready to face it. His words did not fade, they stayed there between us, steady, unshaken, like they had already taken root somewhere deeper than I could reach. I sat still for a moment longer, my hands tightening slightly in my lap, before I forced them to relax, because I did not want him to see how much that affected me, even though I was starting to understand that he probably already knew. "You say everything like it is already done," I said quietly, lifting my eyes back to his. Adrian did not move away, did not soften his stance. He simply watched me, like he was waiting for me to catch up to something he had already accepted. "Because most of it is," he replied, and that should have sounded arrogant, it should have pushed me away, but it did not. It just made me think, made me question how someone could be so certain about things that felt completely out of control to me. I shifted slightly in the chair, my body leaning forward just enough to close some of the distance between us, not physically, but in intention. "And what about the things you cannot control?" I asked, his gaze sharpened just slightly at that, like the question mattered more than the others had. "Those are the only things worth paying attention to," he said, and for a second that answer caught me off guard. because it was not what I expected, not what I had prepared myself for. I frowned, just a little, studying him more carefully now. Like what? I pressed Adrian's eyes, held mine steady, unwavering. Like you, he said simply, and the room felt quieter somehow, like everything else had stepped back to make space for those words. My breath slowed, just slightly, my thoughts stalling for a moment, because I did not know how to respond to that. I should have deflected, I should have laughed it off, but I did not. I just sat there, letting it settle, letting it become real. You do not even know me, I said, finally, softer than before, but there was less resistance in it now, less defense. Adrian did not argue that he did not list facts or details. He just looked at me like he did not need any of that. I know enough to know you are not who you were yesterday, he replied, and something about that hit deeper than I expected, because he was right again. I could feel it in the way I was sitting here. Instead of leaving, in the way I was asking questions instead of avoiding them. I looked down briefly, then back up, my voice quieter, but more certain this time. And what if I do not want to be part of this? I asked. Adrian's expression did not change, but his answer came without hesitation. Then you walk away, he said simply, and I blinked slightly at how easy he made it sound, how uncomplicated. He made something that felt anything but simple, just like that. I asked. He nodded once. Just like that, he repeated, and I searched his face for something, doubt, hesitation, anything that suggested it was not true, but there was nothing there, only certainty, only control, and somehow that made it harder, not easier, because if leaving was that simple, then why was I still sitting here? Why did the idea of standing up and walking out feel heavier than anything else I had faced? I let out a slow breath, my shoulders dropping slightly as the realization settled in. I could leave, I said, more to myself than to him. Adrian did not respond. He just watched me, and that silence said more than words could. I looked at the door, then back at him, my pulse steady, but stronger now, more deliberate, because something inside me was shifting again, not fear, not panic, something else, something closer to clarity. But I am not going to, I said finally, the words coming out calm, steady, like they had already been decided. Adrian held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once, not surprised, not impressed, just acknowledging it like it was exactly what he expected. I know, he said quietly, and for the first time since I stepped into his world, I realized something that changed everything. He had never been waiting to see if I would leave. He had been waiting to see when I would choose to stay the way. He said it stayed with me longer than it should have, not the words themselves, but the certainty behind them, like he had seen this moment before, like my decision had never really been a question. I shifted slightly in the chair, my posture straighter, now my thoughts clearer than they had been since last night. You act like you already know what I am going to do before I do it, I said quietly. Adrian did not deny it. He did not even try. I pay attention, he replied, and there was something in that answer that felt more honest than anything else he had said. Not control, not power, just awareness. The kind that noticed things other people ignored. I studied him for a moment longer, then stood slowly, the movement deliberate this time, not uncertain, not reactive, just a choice. Adrian's gaze followed me, but he did not move to stop me. He did not question it. He just watched, like he was waiting to see what I would do next. I took a step toward the window, then another, my reflection meeting me in the glass again, but it did not look the same as it had earlier. Something in my expression had changed. Something quieter but stronger. I crossed my arms loosely, not to protect myself, but to think, to steady the shift happening inside me. If I stay, I said slowly, my eyes still on the city beyond the glass, then I need to understand what I am staying in. Adrian did not answer right away. I could feel his attention sharpen behind me, the space between us tightening slightly, without either of us moving. You are staying in my world, he said finally, and I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. That does not explain anything, I replied, turning back to face him. Adrian pushed off the desk and walked toward me, stopping just a few feet away, close enough that I could see the details I had missed before, the faint lines of tension near his eyes, the stillness in his posture that was not relaxed but controlled. It is not supposed to, he said quietly, and that answer should have frustrated me. It should have made me pull back, but instead it made me step forward, closing the distance just slightly. Because I was no longer trying to escape, I was trying to understand. Then explain what matters, I said. His gaze held mine steady, and for the first time there was something else. There's something not softer, but more direct, more intentional. What matters is that you are here now, he said, and that changes things. I frowned slightly. For you or for me, I asked. Adrian did not hesitate. Both, he replied, and the words settled between us heavier than anything else had, because it meant I was not just a bystander in this. I was part of it, whether I fully understood it or not. I looked down briefly, then back up, my voice quieter, but more certain. I do not want to lose myself in this, I admitted. Adrian's expression did not change, but his answer came immediately. Then do not, he said simply, and I blinked slightly at how easy he made it sound again, how direct, how uncomplicated. It is not that simple, I said. Adrian's head tilted just slightly, like he was considering that. It is if you decide it is, he replied, and something about that shifted everything again, because he was not telling me who to be, he was telling me I still had a choice. Even here, even now, I let out a slow breath, my shoulders relaxing just a fraction as the tension in my chest eased. You really believe that? I said. Adrian's gaze did not waver. I do not believe things, he said quietly. I decide them. And there it was again, that certainty, that control, but this time it did not feel like something closing in on me. It felt like something I could step into if I chose to. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded, once not fully understanding, not fully ready, but no longer resisting. Then I guess I need to decide something too, I said. Adrian watched me closely, but this time there was no pressure in it, no expectation, just attention. And for the first time since everything began, I felt like I was not just reacting to his world, I was starting to shape my place in it. The air between us did not feel uncertain anymore. It felt charged, like something had finally aligned into place. I held his gaze a second longer, then stepped back, not retreating, just creating space enough to think, clearly enough to choose. Then I will decide this, I said, my voice steady, not loud, but firm. Adrian did not interrupt, he did not move, he just watched the way he always did, like every word mattered. I am not staying here, because I am afraid of Ryan, I continued slowly, feeling each word settle into something real. And I am not staying because you told me I should. A small pause followed, but this time it was mine to control. I am staying because I want to understand what this is. I gestured lightly between us, the space, the moment, everything that had happened since last night. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, not softer, not harder, just more focused, like I had just crossed a line he had been waiting for. Good, he said quietly, and the word carried weight. Approval, not in the way I expected, not something given lightly, but something earned. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders easing just slightly as the tension in my chest settled into something steadier. But that does not mean I belong to this world, I added, and there it was, the line I needed to draw, the one thing I needed to hold on to. Adrian's gaze did not waver. You do not belong to anything you do not choose, he replied, and that answer landed differently this time, not like control, not like ownership, but like permission. I studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once, because that was something I could accept, something I could stand on. Then here is my decision, I said, my voice quieter now, but more certain than it had ever been. I stay, but on my terms. Adrian's head tilted slightly, not questioning, not resisting, just acknowledging the statement. And those are, he asked. I held his gaze steady, no hesitation now. You do not make decisions for me, I said. You do not decide what I do, where I go, or who I become. The words came out clear, direct, each one placing a boundary that I needed to see myself say. And if I walk away at any point, I continued, you let me go? The room felt still after that, like everything was waiting for his response, like this was the moment that would define everything. Adrian did not answer right away. He looked at me closely, his eyes searching not for weakness, but for certainty, for truth. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, unchanged. If you walk away, it will be because you chose to, he said, not because you were pushed, not because you were afraid. I felt my breath catch slightly, because that was not exactly what I asked, but it was something more, something deeper. That is not the same as saying you will let me go, I pointed out quietly. Adrian took a step closer, then stopping just enough to keep that careful distance between us. I do not hold on to things that do not want to stay, he said, and there was no threat in it, no pressure, just truth, the kind that did not need to be proven. I searched his face for a moment longer, then slowly nodded, because I understood what he meant, even if he did not say it the way I expected. Then we understand each other, I said. Adrian's gaze held mine, and for the first time, there was something almost like respect there, not given freely, not easily, but present. We do, he replied, and the room seemed to settle around that agreement. Something quiet, but significant, like a contract that did not need to be written because it had already been decided. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my body finally easing into something steadier, something grounded, because for the first time since everything began, I did not feel like I was being pulled into his world. I felt like I was stepping into it on my own terms, and that changed everything. The agreement settled into the room, like something permanent, not loud, not dramatic, just there, solid and undeniable. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then let out a slow breath, the kind that felt different from the ones before. Steadier, clearer, like something inside me had finally stopped resisting. Then, that is how this works, I said quietly. Adrian nodded once, no hesitation, no need to confirm it further, because it had already been decided. In the way we stood, in the way neither of us stepped back, the silence that followed was not empty, it was calm, like the space between two people who understood the rules, even if they had not spoken them out loud for long. I looked around the room again, taking in the details, the order, the control, the quiet power that seemed to exist in every corner, and for the first time it did not feel overwhelming. It felt structured, like something I could learn instead of something I had to fear. What happens now? I asked, the question simple but real. Adrian shifted slightly, his posture relaxing, just enough to signal a change, not in control, but in direction. Now you live your life, he said, and I blinked slightly at how normal that sounded compared to everything else. That is it? I asked. He gave a small nod. That is it, he repeated, and I let out a small breath, almost a laugh this time, because it felt strange how something so complicated could be answered so simply. And you? I asked. Adrian's eyes held mine steady. I continue mine, he replied, and there was something in that answer that felt honest, not distant, not detached, just separate, like two paths that had crossed, but not merged completely. I nodded slowly, understanding more than I expected, because that was what I wanted to, not to disappear into his world, not to be consumed by it, but to stand beside it, to understand it on my own terms. I turned toward the door, then paused, my hand hovering near the handle as a thought surfaced, something I had not said, yet something that felt important. I looked back at him, meeting his gaze one more time. Thank you, I said, and this time it was not for the car or the room or the protection. It was for something else, something deeper. Adrian studied me for a second, then inclined his head slightly. You chose well, he said, and the words stayed with me longer than they should have, not because of how they sounded, but because of what they meant. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, the same quiet, the same soft light, but it felt different now, familiar instead of foreign. I walked slowly at first, then steadier with each step, my thoughts no longer scattered, no longer chasing fear, but moving forward with intention. When I reached the end of the hall, I stopped for just a second, glancing back over my shoulder, not at the door, not at him, but at the path I had just taken, because I knew something now that I had not known before. I had not been saved, I had not been taken, I had chosen, and that choice had changed everything. I turned forward again and kept walking, because whatever came next was no longer something I had to run from. It was something I was ready to face, and somewhere behind me, in a quiet room filled with control and certainty, was a man who did not chase, did not force, did not follow, but somehow still made the world feel like it had shifted the moment I stepped into it. And as I reached the elevator and pressed the button, I realized something that stayed with me long after the doors closed. He did not hold me there, he did not need to, because the real reason I stayed had never been him. It had been the version of myself I became the moment I stopped running.